Hey everyone, it's Jess. Today is Tuesday, the 2nd of June. It's the second day of winter now in Sydney, and I just found it amusing that yesterday I was on camera saying, guys, we've been blessed with such warm weather even though it's the beginning of winter, and today and yesterday I was in a t-shirt, but today I'm in this giant jacket. I've got a hoodie on because it's so cold. Today's video is going to be sharing 8 tips to winterproof your plants. These are some of the things that I've learnt from my experience last winter with some of my plants, and I just thought, since it's the beginning of winter here in Sydney, I thought I'd just share them with you guys so that you know you still have a little bit of time to winterproof your plants with some of these things. Now, I remember last year when I started really getting into plants, and to be honest, I didn't really know what I was in for when I was approaching my first winter with my plants. And I remember I was just so enthusiastic in that summer of 2019. I had purchased all these plants, mostly tropicals, and I just wasn't prepared enough over the winter, and some of them suffered, and I actually lost some of my plants. I lost some alocasias, I lost a tetrasperma, and I almost lost my Ethereum vitiforum, which that would have been devastating. So guys, the first tip I have for everyone is to get yourself a moisture meter. Now, a moisture meter is something that you stick in the ground that can read whether or not the soil is dry or wet or moist, and what it does, it's a very handy tool to help you understand if your soil is too wet, if your plant needs to be watered. Now, as we get into winter months, it takes a lot longer for the moisture and the water in the soil to dry up, and so one of the risks around winter is overwatering and then ultimately killing your plant. So winter, you just want to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more observant of your watering regime, because you don't want to overwater your plant or to water your plant when its soil is retaining too much moisture, because that can cause two things. One, it can cause root rot, which will actually be detrimental to your plant, or it can cause frostbite for your plant because the water hasn't had enough chance to evaporate during the day, and so when night falls and the temperatures drop, it just amplifies the frost and the coldness around your plant, if that makes sense, and that actually can be quite damaging to the roots of the plant. A moisture meter was something really important that I learnt last year. For the longest time I thought that I could just eyeball my plants and to see if the soil is dry, but a moisture meter makes the exercise a lot more scientific and accurate, because sometimes even though the soil looks like it's too moist for you to water your plant, actually it can actually be quite dry. So getting a moisture meter is a good way to just keep on top of whether or not you should be watering your plant so that you don't overwater it. The moisture meter I have is from Bunnings. It costs around $9 to $10, so it's a cheap investment to put in to save the lives of your plant. Tip number 2 is to get yourself some horticultural charcoal. Now, charcoal has antibacterial properties. It's good at wicking away excess moisture from your potting mix, and because of its antibacterial properties, it actually helps keep bacteria and fungus at bay. And this is particularly important because over winter and the season becomes a lot more colder and wetter, this is great environments for fungus and bacteria to grow. So having charcoal is a great preventative way to mitigate any bacteria or fungus from growing. So what I do is I mix this with my potting mix. I have seen where people layer the charcoal, where they've put the pebbles at the bottom of the pot, and then they put a layer of charcoal before they go over the potting mix. I personally prefer to mix my charcoal in with my potting mix or my soil, just because then it helps with the aeration of the soil a lot better. Charcoal is something great to have in your winter toolkit, because if you do come across root rot and you need to repot your plants, I suggest repotting it in fresh soil and putting some charcoal with your potting mix so that your potting mix does have that antibacterial property. Now the bag I got is from Bunnings. I think it's around, I think I paid about $8 for a 5 litre bag, and it's actually lasted me for a year and a half, and I think I'm just still only halfway through. Tip number 3 is getting yourself some perlite and some pumice. So this follows on from my charcoal tip because these are things that you can use with your potting mix. The reason why I say get perlite and pumice is because if you come across root rot, you need to repot your plant in some fresh potting mix, and that potting mix needs to be quite well aerated, because root rot occurs when the roots haven't had enough oxygen because the soil has been either retained too much moisture or it's just too compact. So getting some perlite or some pumice into your potting mix ensures that your potting mix is more aerated, so that when you pop your plant in its fresh new soil, the roots do have an opportunity to get some more oxygen to them. I only recently got my hands on some pumice. I got it because I found that perlite was a little bit expensive, and I just went through my bags of perlites like popcorn. I went through them, don't eat them as in I went through them quite quickly. I think a bag of perlite is about $12, so I do think it's quite expensive, whereas I got my bag of pumice, I think it's 20 litres for about $29, so it was a lot more economical. Tip number 3 is to make sure you get yourself some perlite and some pumice, because when it comes time for you to repot your plant in some fresh soil, you have some medium in place that will ensure your soil is a lot more aerated. Tip number 4 is to get yourself some neem oil and a spray. So neem oil I find is more of a natural deterrent for a lot of pests such as mealybugs and spider mites, so I much prefer using less chemically based sprays or pesticides to keep my pests at bay. This bottle of neem oil I got from Bunnings. I think I paid about $15 for it, and every time you use to fill up a spray bottle of this size, I only use a drop of neem oil, so it can be quite economical. You just want to make sure you put some soap into your spray so that the oil does break down. The other option I would use is sometimes I use vinegar or apple cider in my sprays. That's when I don't have neem oil, and in fact last winter I mainly used vinegar and apple cider vinegar to create the sprays to keep the pests at bay. So tip number 4 is get yourself some neem oil and a spray, because this will come handy particularly when you need to treat any bacterial or fungal rot that starts to appear on your plants. Tip number 5 is I recommend getting some terracotta pots. Now terracotta pots are, in my opinion, a great way to wick away some excess moisture from your plant. Terracotta pots are a great terracotta pots are a great, I'm getting tongue-tied. Terracotta pots are a great way to ensure any excess moisture is wicked away from the soil. It also helps with ensuring that there is enough aeration and oxygen to get to your roots, because terracotta is a porous material versus plastic pots. You can't really get air to pass through plastic. I recommend where you have plants that need a little bit more oxygen to their roots, so plants such as anthuriums and begonias, I will recommend keeping these plants in terracotta pots. Or if you start suspecting your plant having some root rot, when you do have the opportunity to pot him up in some new soil, I'd recommend switching your plant to a terracotta pot in that process. And actually that was one of the best tips I came across last year, because my Anthurium vitifolium was just experiencing so much root rot, and I did pot him up in a terracotta pot, which I do think really helped. The 6th tip I have is to consider getting some heat mats. Now I know heat mats can be a little bit more of an investment. A typical heat mat could cost between $40 to $60. I get my heat mats on eBay and they're around $40 for a small size heat mat, but these are a great way, and it's a small investment, I'd say, particularly if you have juvenile and tropical plants. Heat mats I find are a good way to help increase the humidity as well as temperatures, particularly if you've got a few juvenile plants or tropical plants or juvenile tropical plants. You just want to make sure that they are kept in quite warm temperatures. So what I do with my heat mats is I pop them beneath either the fish tank that I have or the IKEA greenhouse, and what that does is that it warms the container so that the air and moisture contained within the greenhouse or the fish tank is a lot more warmer than the air around it. Tip number 7, I think, is to get yourself some sort of container. I know I mentioned my IKEA greenhouse and this fish tank that I repurposed to house my more juvenile plants, but any sort of container such as, and also mind you, this will depend on how many plants you need to house, but any sort of storage container or a box or a plastic box is a good way to create a more stable environment for you to house your plants. Such as like a glass dome you can pop over the top of your plant is another good way to make sure you create that really protected environment for your plant. Other things I use are empty fruit containers or empty strawberry containers. That's where I put some of my cuttings. Another tip is you could use plastic bags. So if you have some of these plastic bags, I actually prefer Ziploc plastic bags because you can actually really seal the edges of the plastic bag around the pot. Now I can't remember at the beginning whether I said I had 7 or 8 tips, but I guess my final tip is around lighting. So over winter you're not going to get as much light over summer. Additionally, the sunlight is not going to be as bright or as strong. So if you've been keeping a plant outdoors and it's accustomed to more light, you just want to make sure that when you bring it indoors, or if you are deciding to keep it indoors over winter, just to ensure that you do have the right lighting environment for it. You might also purchase yourself a small grow light so the plant gets the light it needs. You might not even need to get a grow light. See, I didn't have a grow light and I still don't have a grow light, but I was just conscious that for those plants that I brought indoors, just make sure that you are keeping him in a well-lit condition, particularly if that plant has been living outside and is more accustomed to in a bright environment. Those were the tips I had for you in terms of winter-proofing your plants. I hope that you found these helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about any of these tips, or if you want an expansion on any one of those tips, let me know. I'm more than happy to do a video. Otherwise guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below or drop me a DM on my Instagram at JessiePotPlants. Otherwise guys, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!